Have you ever found yourself watching an animated film by Pixar or maybe DreamWorks and thought, man, this is cool, I wish I had the skill to create something like this myself, but you were never really sure where to even get started? This is DigiNut, and in this episode we're going to be taking a look at Blender, a free and open source 3D design application that will give you the tools you need to get started creating your very own 3D animations. Before we begin, I just want to mention that this is meant to be more of an overview of Blender. Blender is a very deep application that's capable of a lot, and there's no way we can really cover everything in one video. I will, however, make more videos, if you guys are interested, where we dive a little bit deeper and look at specific features and creating scenes. But to begin with, let's just get you up and running and get you started creating your own content. So the first thing you're going to want to do is go to blender.org. You'll notice a download section here, and it doesn't really matter what system you're running, whether you're a Windows user or an Apple user, or you're running Linux like I am. There's a package that's going to suit your needs. So just go ahead and install it, and once you do, I've previously installed, so I'll just go ahead and launch Blender here. The first thing you're going to see when you launch it is this kind of splash screen here. And this just gives you a few handy links, as well as it kind of shows you your most recent files that you've been working on. So if you click anywhere, that will close, and you'll be presented with the default view in Blender. Now, I've talked to a few people who, upon opening, get incredibly intimidated by the application because there's really a lot going on. Even with just the default view, there's a lot of buttons, and it's a little bit daunting. But once you learn a few key concepts, it's actually pretty quick and easy to get started. So we've opened the application, and the first thing we'll probably try and do is go ahead and select our box, or maybe select this light or the camera, and we're going to see this bizarre 3D cursor kind of snapping to wherever we click. This can be pretty confusing right off the bat. This 3D cursor, to be totally honest, as a new user, you're probably not going to use it all that much, so you can kind of ignore it for now. The other thing I will say is in Blender, the mouse clicks are kind of backwards, in my opinion. And if you're moving over from any other 3D application, or indeed most applications, you'll probably find the same thing. So by right-clicking, I can select things within my scene, like this 3D cube or the camera. And by left-clicking, I'm actually adjusting this 3D cursor. This is adjustable, so it depends on your preference. But for me, I like the opposite of that. I want to left-click to select things. So first thing I do when I install Blender for the first time or on a new system is I go to File and then User Preferences, and I change this under Input here. I change this from right to left so that when I left-click something, it selects it. And if I right-click, it will move the 3D cursor. That's just my preference. You can do whatever kind of fits best for you. So now if I'm left-clicking, I'm selecting things within my scene. Okay, so now that we've taken care of that, the next thing I want to talk about are these panels within Blender. So Blender has a very, very cool panel system that allows you to really kind of lay it out however you prefer. So as a new user, this might be a little bit confusing at first. These panels are very dynamic, and you may accidentally lose a panel and not know how to get it back. So let me just cover a few basics here so that you never get stuck. So up here we have our 3D view. Down here we have what's called the timeline, and I'm just going to adjust this and drag it up a little bit so you can see it a bit better. Over here we have an outliner here, which kind of shows each element in the current scene that we're in. So you can see the camera here that's selected. I can select the cube or the lamp, for example. This just gives me quick links to everything in my scene. And down here we have the properties panel with a number of tabs along the top here. So each one of these panels can be any different type. So there are basically panels, and then there are panel types. Actually, I think they're called editor types in Blender. So each panel can be any editor type. So here we have this one set to the 3D view, but if I wanted to change it to a properties panel, I could do that. So now I have two properties panels, one here and one over here as well. I haven't lost anything. I've just changed what is actually being shown within this panel. So you may have noticed that the control was in the bottom left and it's now popped up to at the top left. This can also be a little bit confusing. It's exactly the same. It's just changed positions. So if I change that back to a 3D view, you'll see not only does it pop back to the 3D view, but it gives me my control in the bottom left. So not only can each panel be any kind of editor type, but you can actually split up panels into additional panels. So for example, I have this big section up here that's representing my 3D view. I may want to actually drag out another panel. In the top right hand corner of each panel, you'll see this kind of control point. And if I left click and drag, I can actually create a new section. And when I do that, I can set it to, whatever I need it to be at that point. So here I'm going to switch it to a dope sheet, for example, and now I have, two sections. One's my 3D view and one is my dope sheet. I can just as easily get rid of it. So in the top right, I can click and drag to the right, and you can see this big arrow pops up showing me that the left panel is going to basically overwrite the right one. Or I can drag the other way and say, no, I want to keep the dope sheet and I want you to basically get rid of the 3D view. So when I let go, you can see that it does that. And of course, all non-destructive. I haven't lost anything. I can just simply switch it back to my 3D view and I'm back in business. The next thing I want to cover is navigation within the 3D view. So the majority of navigation is accomplished with your middle mouse button. Zooming in and out is as simple as scrolling the middle mouse button. If you hold the middle mouse button down and drag around, you'll notice that you'll rotate around whatever you have selected. And then if you hold down the middle mouse button as well as shift and scroll around, you'll notice that you'll sort of pan around. The view or the camera will remain kind of in the same spot, and you'll just sort of dolly up and down or back and forth. Pressing the period on the number pad will zoom in and focus on whatever item you have selected. This is a super fast and easy way to kind of navigate around your scene. Just select the item you want to work on, click the period key, and now you're kind of locked onto it. So now let's quickly talk about the properties panel over here on the right hand side. So you'll notice that there's a number of tabs here at the top that allow you to toggle between different controls here. And the first 4 tabs are sort of global tabs, meaning no matter what you have selected in your scene, they always remain the same. The last, however, will change depending on what you have selected in your scene. So you can see now I have the cube selected, and each one of these tabs now represents controls for that item. So for example, if I was to select the light, you'll see that the controls here now change. You can see this is representing the lamp, and all of a sudden I have these additional controls for the light itself. Similarly, if I select the camera, I now have controls for the camera. So with a 3D mesh selected within the scene, I can come over to the Object tab here, and under Transform, I now have controls for the scale of the mesh, the rotation, for example, and the location within the scene itself that I can now start to adjust. Beyond that, you can see I can actually set this object to particular layers. The layer controls within Blender are a little bit different than most, but you kind of get this grid type system. And you can see the top left button is selected there. I can go ahead and put this on a separate layer, and you'll notice that it disappears within my scene. The reason for this is that I only have the first layer selected, and I can see that there's something on the second layer, but it's not visible within my scene. So if I clicked on it, I would now see whatever's on that layer. And I'm sort of toggling back and forth. If I hold down the Shift key and click, I can select both layers and have it display the first layer, which contains my camera and my light, as well as the second layer, which contains the 3D cube. So now see all of them. So the last thing I want to show you in this brief overview of Blender is how to actually begin editing a 3D mesh. So you can see here I've got my 3D view open and I have this cube selected. Now there are different modes in Blender, and right now I'm in object mode. You can see down here, in this drop down I have object mode selected. This basically means when I start adjusting the position of my cube or the scale, for example, of my cube, it's affecting the entire cube, the entire mesh. But I can actually go in and adjust or manipulate each vertice of my mesh. And to do this, I need to go into edit mode. So I can either go down here and select edit mode, or I can simply click the tab key, which puts me into edit mode. If I zoom in here, you can see I can now start to select each corner or each vertice of this mesh. And when I start to manipulate that, you can see that it actually will just affect that one vertice and redraw the mesh as necessary. Down here, it's important to point out that I can control a vertice, or I can actually control an edge. So if I manipulate this edge, you can see the entire thing being adjusted there. Or I can go ahead and adjust an entire face, like so. So you might think, okay, well that's great. Like I have, a few control points here. I can adjust this to a certain degree, but how can I actually start building out a complex mesh? So now I just want to show you really quickly a few controls over here that will allow you to actually start modeling. So the first thing I'll show you is this extrude here. I can select a face on my mesh, like this top one here. And if I click the extrude button, you can see what happens. I actually start to pull out new faces. I start to create new edges and new faces. So quickly I can start to actually create something a little bit more complex by simply selecting a face, clicking the extrude button, and dragging that face out. Like so. The other thing I can do is I can actually subdivide this mesh. So if it's not dense enough for me and I want more control points, I want more vertices, I can actually subdivide each one of these faces. To do that, I can press the A key, which deselects everything if you have anything selected. If I click it again, it now selects everything. And over here on the left, I have this subdivide button. And if I click that, you can see it's now taken each face and subdivided it. There's this option down here called number of cuts. And as I start to increase that, you can see what's happening. My mesh now becomes more and more dense. And now if I click A again, now I have a much, much more dense mesh, and I can continue to do what I was doing before, selecting a face, extruding it, and I can start to create more and more complex objects here. So hopefully that's starting to make sense. And to be totally honest, in Blender, the best way to learn is really to come in. Don't be afraid of, just testing things out and trying things out and making mistakes and undoing them and seeing what you can create. But hopefully that'll give you kind of a good introduction to the application. If you guys are interested in learning a bit more, just let me know and I can do a continuation and show you a little bit more, maybe dive deeper into some more of the features within Blender. But I think for now that should get you up and running, and hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Just let me know in the comments. This episode is brought to you by Traction Guest, the first Office sign-in application developed with data collection, security, and integration at the forefront. Traction Guest, your experience starts here.